I want to begin by welcoming all of you that are watching via our broadcast from the Lee Summit, Blue Valley, and also the Olathe campuses. And we invite all of you, wherever you are, to open your Bibles to John chapter 10 as we continue today our study of the real Jesus. Today, via his declaration, his bold declaration, I am the Good Shepherd. Now, you know, sheep and shepherds were very familiar things in Jesus' day and to the culture in which he speaks, not so much to us. In fact, when was the last time you were driving down the road and you saw a shepherd out in a field tending his flock? The last time I actually saw that was when I was traveling in Israel, where still today it's a pretty familiar scene. Sheep and shepherd have always been central to Jewish life in certain parts of the world, including the Middle East. The patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were all shepherds. Israel's greatest leaders through the centuries, Moses and David, namely, were prepared by God to lead and shepherd his people, first by spending years of shepherding dirty, smelly sheep. In fact, throughout the Old Testament, God describes his own relationship to Israel, to his people, as that of a shepherd to his flock. Psalm 78:52, he led out his people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. Psalms 95:7, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Furthermore, everyone throughout biblical history that God ever called to lead his people was seen as a shepherd. Every prophet, priest, and king were basically called to be his under-shepherds. Psalm 77:20, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. 1 Chronicles 17:6, God's command for all of the judges of Israel throughout that period of Old Testament history, his command to every judge was, you shepherd my people. Jeremiah 3:15, he promised his people, someday I will give you shepherds after my own heart who will feed you with knowledge and understanding. This shepherding leadership metaphor continues throughout the New Testament. One example is in Acts 20, where Paul tells the elders of Ephesus, I want you to pay close attention to yourselves and to all of the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you an overseer to care for. And the word there is literally to shepherd the flock of God, for which God has obtained with his own blood. For I know after my departure that fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. And I think perhaps most relevant today is that, especially in the Old Testament, there are many messianic prophecies. Ezekiel 34 is an example where it foretells a day when Messiah, the Christ, will come and he will represent God. And through him, God said, I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep. And so that's the kind of the big theological picture of this metaphor in the Bible. But the text that we're going to look at today in John 10 has a very specific context that I want you to understand. You see, the Jewish leaders that Jesus has been having these confrontations with, that we've seen the last few weeks, they called themselves, their title for themselves was the shepherds of Israel. They said, you know, God had shepherds in the past. There was like Moses, and there was Joshua, and there was David and the kings, and now it's us. We are the shepherds of God, the shepherds of God's people. That was their title for themselves. There was this specific event that occurred in John chapter 9, and that event is what led to the Lord making a speech in John 10 on shepherds and sheep. But let's pick up the story. At the end of chapter 8, where we were a few weeks ago, we saw at the end of this confrontation with the Jews, the Jewish leaders picked up stones to throw at Jesus. Hell broke loose. The Jews had just made this, it drew so much attention, so much commotion, and they had just made this rule in the synagogue that anyone confessing Jesus as Messiah is going to be kicked out of the synagogue. And what we have to understand is that in their one church, very theocratic culture, being kicked out of the synagogue meant you're a total social outcast, totally ostracized from society. Listen, worse than being a blind beggar that everyone has pity on and gives alms to is being one that's been kicked out of the synagogue. This guy went from being ostracized in one way to being worse, to be socially ostracized. No one's going to help someone. Church. Well, anyway, they brought this man into the synagogue, and they examined him, and they were trying to get him to say bad things about Jesus, and they brought his parents in, and you can read the whole story, and eventually they kicked him out of the synagogue, which made his condition with sight worse than his condition without sight. And what did he say? Did he say something wrong? Did he confess Jesus as Messiah? No, but he wouldn't say what they wanted him to say the way he wanted them to say it. And what he said was, look, I don't even know all the theology of what happened to me. All I know is I once was blind and now I see, and Jesus is the reason. He's where my sight came from. Now, what's interesting, in John 9, verse 35, it says that Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when Jesus heard what the Pharisees had done to this man that he had healed and how now his situation was worse than it was before the healing, Jesus sought the man out. He went looking for the man, and he found him. And they had an incredible conversation, and Jesus gave him an even greater gift than the sight. He saved him. Because at the end of the conversation, the man confessed his faith in Jesus as Messiah. He called him Lord, and he worshiped Jesus, and Jesus received that from him. Of course, this set the Pharisees off again. The true shepherds of Israel were infuriated at this. And it is as all the people are watching this conversation between Jesus and the blind man and the Pharisees coming again against him, that Jesus turns, and responding to their rage toward him and to their total lack of mercy for the man he had healed, Jesus turns to the crowd and he explains how they can know that he is the good shepherd sent from God and not these men who claim to be their shepherds. And this is an incredible confrontation in public with a blind man who's no longer blind, a lost man who's no longer lost, sitting right there. Now, we're going to walk quickly through this text, but I think to understand the Lord's words, we need a little more context. We need to know something of sheep and shepherds. So let me start with some facts about sheep. Most of us imagine sheep to be these cute, cuddly, sweet-smelling little creatures. We call our little children the innocent lambs. You know, we have all this imagery that deals with. That's because we're ignorant and inexperienced with sheep. Fact number one, sheep can be downright mean. They can and they often are cruel to one another and even to the shepherds that care for them. A few years ago, I had a pastor friend sent me a video that he had got somewhere of some motorists who were driving in Albania, where you still see sheep and shepherds alongside the road. And the caption of this video he sent me said, "Sometimes being a pastor be like," right? That you remember that. This would be funnier after the video. But watch the video. This is what being pastor be like. Okay, watch this video.
Also was mich wundert, ist, dass der nicht, wenn du jetzt hier ein Stück fährst, dass der nicht dann automatisch umschaltet und neu rechnet.
I love the sheepdog coming to protect the flock from the car. Watch the shepherd. Watch the shepherd.
Ach, scheiße, fällt ihn noch rein.
Hey, hit him again.
Schafen überrannt. Scheiße.
Das ist der Bock, ne?
Ja.
Gute Frau.
Ah, scheiße. Hey, 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 hey. Scheiße. Pass auf mit dem.
All right, did I totally destroy your stereotype of sheep? Right? Listen, sheep can be downright mean. Fact number two, sheep are helpless. They can't take care of themselves. They're subject to all kinds of wolves and lions and bears love to eat mutton. They love it. But the sheep are incapable of regularly feeding themselves without a shepherd. They're helpless. They're known to blindly wander off and fall into inescapable crevices and ravines. This week I read how a flock of sheep without a shepherd might eat all the grass in a certain area. They might totally eat it down to the nubs. I mean, there's nothing left. And then they would just sit down and starve to death, even though just a few feet away there might be another green meadow, but they're not smart enough. They're helpless to go over there and look for it. Or they could be right in a green meadow and just forget to eat, just kind of wander around and get in trouble that way. And so sometimes shepherds must literally make the sheep lie down in the green pastures so they will feed themselves, because sheep are helpless without a shepherd. Number 3, sheep are basically stupid. They're not smart animals, right? And you need to understand this, that when the Bible compares us to sheep, it's not flattering us, right? It's not what it is. You need a shepherd because you're not very smart. You don't understand the world in which you live. When a sheep's wool gets really, really thick right before shearing, their lives are literally at risk around any kind of running water because they're stupid. This is why the psalmist says he leads me beside still waters, because see, if they come and they drink from a fast-moving river and it starts splashing up on their wool, their heads will get so heavy that they'll topple into the river and drown. Now, sheep actually can swim a little bit for short distances, but they're not buoyant, and when their wool is full, they're going to the bottom. Here's some facts about first century Judean shepherding itself. Number 1, in a typical village, not everyone's village, there were some wealthy people, but in a typical Judean village, each little shepherd owned his own little flock. And during the day, they didn't all get the sheep together and go out because that would just devastate the land. They would spread out throughout the Judean hills and try not to overgraze. But each shepherd owned his own flock from which his family produced wool and meat to consume for themselves, to survive on, and also to trade for other things they needed. Number 2, this is an interesting trivia. Every shepherd knew his own sheep. Shepherds would name their sheep. And, the sheep all look the same to me, but they would know their sheep. And like, if you have a dog, I bet none of you have a dog at home that doesn't have a name. You give the dog a name. Well, they gave their sheep names. The names would be based on some thing, that idiosyncrasy or something. That's Spot. Okay, I get that one. That's Stinky. I get that one. That's Fred. It means something to the shepherd. It looks like Fred. I don't know. But the sheep would have a name. And this is the one area where sheep aren't totally dumb, is that they would eventually learn their name. They would learn who they were, and they would learn the voice of their master. And sheep are not trusting, and they won't listen. They won't follow strangers, but they'll follow the one that they know. Number 3, you need to understand that shepherding is a 24/7 responsibility. There's no days off for a shepherd. Every single day of the year, the sheep must be fed, watered, and checked for disease and injury. You can't just put sheep out in the grass and come back and get them at night. You can't do that. They won't be there. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, all of the sheep, every one of the sheep must be watched over and protected. They must be protected from their own stupidity. They must be protected from the bullying and the abuse of other unruly sheep in the flock. And you know what you do, by the way, with that kind of sheep? That sheep gets marked out for the next family barbecue, right? But they have to protect the other sheep from the mean sheep. And of course, they have to be protected from the constant threat of predators and from thieves and robbers. Now think what this means for the life of a shepherd. How does a poor shepherd with just a small flock of sheep provide 24/7 care for his sheep and also have a life? How does he care for a wife and for kids? And how does he fulfill any other civic duties or participate in the religious responsibilities that all good men participated in? Listen, it was very, very hard for them. And one reason that shepherds were at the bottom end of the societal totem pole, they were outcast in society, is because they always smelled, they were always dirty, they were always sweaty. You could see they would have this leathery, rough skin, because this is what happens when you stand all day in the sun and the wind and the rain and the hail, because you can't leave the sheep. And they didn't have time in their life to do all the things that normal people did. They didn't have time for all the ceremonial washing, so they neglected some of those things. They didn't make all of the religious services. They weren't able to just shut up shop and go for a week and ascend to Jerusalem for the big national festivals, because someone has to watch the sheep. They weren't at all the community events, and so this was their life. And people looked down on them because they weren't part of things. If a man was lucky enough to find his wife, most shepherds didn't have wives. Who would want to be married to a shepherd, right? But if a man was lucky enough to find a wife, and if he could have sons, now he's going somewhere. Because you could send your sons out into the field and you could focus on maybe finding some markets for your wool or markets for products that you were making with your wool, or you could maybe find some products and work on marketing your meat, and you could begin to maybe acquire a little wealth for the family and for the next generation of shepherds. This is what Jacob did with 10 of his sons. He didn't send Benjamin and Joseph, but he sent the other 10 out there to the flock. He had other things for those 2 boys. This is what Jesse did with David. It's what Jethro did with his son-in-law Moses. And here's the thing, if a man could kind of get ahead ever, and his flocks would grow, and the prophets were growing, then he could eventually go out and hire some men. He could have some hired hands. That's what Laban did with Jacob before he became his son-in-law. Now, of course, we know there's always 2 kinds of employees, right? There are those with very high character, and you hire them and they agree to do a certain job for a certain wage, and they show up to work every day and they embrace the values and the mission of the company, and they begin to work and pitch in, and some of them come to truly love their boss and maybe the boss's family or the family business, and they become like part of the family. They do everything they can to bless and serve the interest of their employer. Abraham somehow developed a whole army of servants and their families who were like that. They were like servants, but they were part of his own household. This is the kind of service that Joseph rendered whoever he was working for, whether he chose to work for them or whether he was made to work for them. This is what he did for Potiphar. It's what he did for the prison warden. It's what he did eventually for Pharaoh himself. Not because those were great leaders, but because Joseph was a man of character who served the Lord in whatever he did. But as any of you who have ever hired anyone knows, those kinds of faithful, high-quality workers, they're hard to find. The Bible, though, talks about the other kind. They're the hired hands. The negative word, the Old Testament, the old Bible translations, King James uses is the hirelings. And those are guys that will do the bare minimum to get a paycheck. That's what they do. And you can bet if you have some of these working for you, the hireling, if there's any personal sacrifices or any risk involved to them, they're out. They're looking for a new job. If your business falls on hard time or there's some season where the workload increases, they're out. They're not part of that. Well, shepherding required no formal education, no apprentice-worthy investment, craftsmanship. So those hired to watch sheep were often at the bottom end, the bottom rung of society. You also need to know this fact. It's the role and the ritual of the fold. It's very important before we jump into the text. Every day, every night, and every morning, there were some rituals that the normal Judean village shepherds went through. Every day before the sun went down, the local shepherds would gather all their sheep into a common village fold. Now, sometimes there was 2, depends on how big the flocks were, but they would put their sheep up for the night together because it was easier to guard them and protect them. A fold is just a pen. It's a sheep pen. And since they didn't have any wood, but they got rocks everywhere, usually these were built. There was a large stone wall, and that stone wall would have one gate, a narrow gate. And you get all the sheep in, and they're inside the wall. Just outside of Bethlehem, there's what they call the Shepherd's Cave. And in that area, they didn't have to build a wall because they had this giant cave in the side of the mountain, the side of the hill, and it had a little narrow entrance. And so they would literally put the sheep for the night outside of Bethlehem into this big cave. And if you want to go see that cave, we're taking a trip in March of 2020, first commercial. The information's about to come out, but we're going to go 11 days starting March 11th. We'd love to have you go with us, but we'll hopefully go in that cave and you can see it. At the entering, as they were coming into this cave for the night, there was a counting of sheep. Make sure that you got them all from the field to the fold. I think that's where the idea of it puts you to sleep because you're dog tired when you're counting the sheep. I think that's where that came from. But what I do know that happened, there was this ritual called the passing under the shepherd's rod. And Ezekiel 20:37 tells us that all of us are someday going to do that in eternity. Every night, the shepherd would bar each sheep from entering the fold until he had inspected it for ticks or lice or disease or injuries that needed treatment. You had to inspect it before you put it in with the community sheep where it could infect all the other sheep. Finally, one or a few of the shepherds, if it was a small flock, just one. If it was a larger flock, you might need some more guys to protect it. A few of the shepherds would take turns, or maybe there was some trusted hired men, and they became the night watchmen. And the leader of that group was designated as the chief shepherd for the night, and he literally put his sleeping bag, he literally slept in the entrance to the fold. And his body became the literal gate or the door by which no one and nothing was going to enter or exit during the night. He was responsible for everyone's sheep for the night. Now, the next morning, all the shepherds of the village would come, and then the flocks were formed. The flocks were separated in the fold. And how'd they do that? Well, each shepherd stood outside the door, and he called out his sheep because his sheep knew his voice. And so he would call out for his sheep, and every shepherd stood outside the door, called, and the sheep knew their master's voice. And then they would come out of the fold, and they would go to the shepherd. And when he had called out all of his sheep, he would lead them off into the green pastures and still waters he had selected for them for the day, and that flock would follow their shepherd because they knew their shepherd. But morning after morning and night after night, day after day after day after day after day, this was the life of a shepherd. Now look at the text. Look at John 10:1. Blind man's here. Pharisees are here. The people are watching it all. And Jesus says this, truly, truly, I say to you, I think he's speaking mostly to the people, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, he sneaks over the wall at night, that man is a thief and a robber. You got some people here claiming to be your shepherds, but they ain't coming through the door. They're coming over the wall at night. One of the things back then, sheep don't like strangers, and so they won't go with the stranger. So if you're trying to steal sheep and you don't want them to make noise because you don't want to fight the watchman, you got to sneak in, you got to be real quiet. Well, how do you get them out of that stone wall? It's hard to get a live sheep up over the wall. So they didn't worry about it. They just slit their throats, quietly killed the sheep, threw the sheep over the wall, and then when they got all they could carry, they'd climb back over the wall, harvest the wool and meat, or carry it off and do that somewhere else. Verse 2, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The next day, the owners, they're not climbing over the wall, they're coming to the door. To him, the gatekeeper opens, and the sheep, they hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and then he leads them out. And they come out of the fold, and when he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them, he walks in front of them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. And then there's this interesting phrase, this figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. You see, Jesus is talking to people that were very familiar with this whole process. They had participated in it or they had seen it many times. They knew all about it, but he's not speaking literally. Jesus is speaking here metaphorically and theologically. He's using a metaphor, and they missed it. He is saying to them that God, the great shepherd, is coming to call his flock to himself, and his sheep will hear his voice, and they'll leave the fold and go with him. In verse 7, so Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. I'm the door. And he's indicting the Pharisees, the false shepherds, who the only reason they served was to fleece and butcher the flock, to build themselves up, to feather their own nest. And Jesus said, all who have come before me, everyone you've known in your life, they're thieves and they're robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. But I am the door. And if anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He's not talking about a physical fold. He's talking about spiritual salvation. And he will go in and he will go out and he will find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it to the full, have it abundantly. Now, spiritually, metaphorically, Satan and his forces, they are the thief. He's the one who only comes into your life to steal, kill, and destroy, not to help you, but to hurt you. But friends, through the millennia and still today, Satan primarily attacks through the mind and through doctrine, and he has used false teachers and false shepherds The Bible calls them, they're ravenous wolves who disguise themselves wearing sheep's garments. They don't disguise themselves as sheep. They wear a shepherd's cloak. They disguise themselves as pastors of the flock. And this is who Satan has always used to do his work. In verse 11, Jesus gives this marvelous description of himself as the good shepherd. He said, I am the good shepherd. Notice first in the I am, he uses it again. It's the ego eimi construction, the special construction. It's the same as the Septuagint word for Yahweh. And in this phrase, he is again, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, he's literally claiming to be one and the same with the God who spoke to Moses from the burning bush in Exodus 3. This is what he's telling them. They heard this. Secondly, he uses the word good, the adjective good in the Greek. It's not what we would expect. It's the word kalos as opposed to the more common word agathos. Agathos means good. That's what you would expect, and it means morally good. I'm the righteous shepherd. I'm the holy shepherd. I'm the shepherd that's right with God. That's what I would expect him to say, and it's not what Jesus said. He says, I'm the kalos shepherd. I'm the good shepherd in the sense, this word means the beautiful one, the attractive one, the compelling one. Good is what you call a spectacular piece of art or a piece of music or a great gourmet meal. This is the kind of good he's talking. It's something that draws you in. It's beautiful. It's a good sunset. It's a beautiful sunset. Friends, think what he's saying. Jesus is saying, my shepherding is not just holy, it's not just righteous, it is beautiful. It's compelling, it's attractive. You should want this in your life. And then he lays down these 3 marks of the good shepherd. This is how you know the good shepherd, and actually any under shepherd of God who's faithful. Number 1, the good shepherd dies for the sheep. Verse 11 continues, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now, he who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, he doesn't own the sheep, he's not a son of the Father. He has no ownership. He does not own the sheep. He sees the wolf coming, and he leaves the sheep, and he flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hireling and cares nothing for the sheep. You know, one of the reasons that David became such a great king is because David was a great shepherd. And one of the reasons that David was such a great shepherd is because from boyhood he had a courageous heart. Shepherds have to be men and women of courage. 1 Samuel 17, he told Saul, at his young age, he says, I've been watching my father's sheep, and I've already stood off face to face, nose to nose, hand to hand. I've fought lions and I've fought bears to protect my father's sheep. I don't run from trouble. That's a good shepherd. In Isaiah 31, it tells us that when a lion attacked a village, who did the people call for? The people that they disrespected and saw them as the dirty people in town and the low end of the totem pole. But listen, if there's trouble, if there's lions out there, they called for the people, the shepherds, to go face the lion. Well, why do you call for the shepherds? Because that's what shepherds do. They're courageous. And every single day they're out there, they risk their lives and they put themselves between the flocks and danger. In contrast, Zechariah 11, this whole passage is about bad shepherds and false shepherds. It's a metaphor too. It's talking about pastors and priests. But one of the marks of fake shepherds, the hirelings, is that they won't even bother to go after the scattered sheep. When the sheep get scattered, they just let them go. They won't go after them. Listen, there's a whole lot of churches today that they don't even have membership anymore. They don't ask anything of their members. There's no covenant. If you come here, that's great, but we're not going to keep track of you. There's no accountability. We're not going to worry about that. Listen, that's not a church. That might be cool. It might fit the narrative of postmodern thinkers who don't want accountability, but it has nothing to do with biblical Christianity. You can't shepherd people if you don't know who your sheep are. You got to know who your sheep are. And the other thing is, if you're a member of Legacy Christian Church and we have these godly men who are trying to shepherd you, when they come to shepherd you because you have strayed from the flock and you've scattered, you be thankful for them and you praise God for them. Don't treat them like that sheep in the video. because they're doing what God's called good shepherds to do. It's hirelings that won't bother to go after the scattered sheep. It's a hireling that runs away when things get hard, when trouble comes. Number two, the good shepherd, they love his sheep. He loves his sheep. Verse 14, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. I know my own. My own know me. You know how close we are? Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Some of you are going to say, Reggie, why do you say it loves? I see the word know. I don't see the word love. Well, when Jesus uses the word know, he is using a common biblical euphemism for love. He's speaking about intimate love. The word know describes the most intimate of loving relationships that people can be part of. In Genesis, Cain knew his wife and she bore a child. In Matthew, Joseph was shocked at Mary's pregnancy because he had not known her. You see, throughout the Bible, the word know, it describes the most intimate of human love, that is like that of shared exclusively between a husband and wife, a love in which there are no secrets, there's nothing hidden, everything is open, and nothing is held back from one another. That's the kind of love the shepherd has with his sheep. The shepherd knows his sheep. Think about what this means in your life. Friends, Jesus knows. He knows all of our strengths and weaknesses, our successes and failures, our joys and sorrows. He knows all of your deepest, darkest secrets. And he knows all of your deep, dark wounds. And yet he loves you still. Number three, the shepherd unites his sheep. Verse 16, this is a very interesting verse. I have other sheep that are not of this fold. Now he's speaking to Jews. Everybody there is a Jew. There's the blind man's a Jew, the people are Jews, the Pharisees are Jews. And he goes, I've come to call my sheep out of this fold, and I have other sheep in other folds. And they also will listen to my voice, so that at the end of the day, there's going to be one flock with one shepherd. Now here's what this means theologically. God had a sheepfold. It was a place where he put up and he kept many of his sheep for a night, and it was called Judaism. It was a sheepfold. It was just a temporary parking place for the sheep of God to be for a time. But not every sheep in that fold, not everyone who's born an ethnic Jew is a Jew by faith. The Bible tells us this, that they're not all sons of Abraham because they don't all believe like Abraham. And being born in the right place doesn't make you right. It's having the faith of your father, Abraham, that makes you right with God. And so not every sheep in that fold belongs to God. They're not true children of God. They're not true Israel. But there's a bunch of God's sheep in that fold. That's where he put them for the night. But now the Messiah has come. The Christ has come. The Good Shepherd has come. And on behalf of his Father, he's going to call them out. And he's going to form his flock. But this is the exciting part for most of us is Jesus said, I got other folds. I got sheep in other folds. I haven't parked all my sheep here. I got some over here, and I got some over here, and I got some over here. And friends, the Bible tells us that God has sheep that he's calling out of all these folds around the world. They're from every nation, every tribe, and every tongue. In all of the pagan religions of the Gentiles, in those places, slumbering for the night, God is calling his own out of there unto himself. And friend, whatever your background, wherever you've been, whatever you've done in the past, however you've thought in the past, if you hear his voice, if you know that voice, leave that place. Come out of that fold and go to the shepherd and follow him wherever he leads, because he's going to take us all from all these places, and we're going to be one flock, and we're going to be one shepherd, and he's going to take us to his green pastures. Verse 17, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. And this charge, this commission to come and die for the sheep and then to take my life up again, I have received this from my Father. I am my Father's son. I'm the owner of the sheep. I'm here on his behalf, and I'm going to do this. Now, you know what's funny? They had no idea what he was talking about. How could they? What is he talking about? He's got authority. What's he saying about this dying and coming back? And what is that? But from our perspective, we see it. So there's stuff they knew that we don't know, and now there's stuff that we know that they didn't know. And the story ends like this. Many said, this is what many say, he has a demon, or he's insane. Why listen to him? But there were others, it's the few, who said, these are not the words of one oppressed by a demon. And they look over at the blind man. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? And friend, here's the bottom line. Division that demands decision is always what happens when the real Jesus is heard. When the real Jesus is seen, when the real Jesus is heard, not the one the world talks about, the one who revealed himself, when he's heard, there's division, and it demands decision. And this is what the real Jesus does. I want to close with just a moment of application. If the chief shepherd at any time in your life calls you to not just be a sheep, but to step up and be an under shepherd of his flock. And I'm going to tell you, I believe if you're a good sheep, every one of you will be called to shepherd somebody somewhere. I believe that. But whether it be as a pastor of a church or as an elder in the church, those are pastors. That's what they do. But if you're a small group leader, you're not there to teach a Bible study. You're there to shepherd a flock. If you're a youth coach, if you work in the children's ministry, you're a shepherd of little sheep and little lambs. And if you're a leader of one of the church's event and ministry teams, and you think, oh, I'm here to get this job done. No, you're not. You're here to shepherd God's people as you work together. We don't care about doing the task. We want to get the task done, but what we care about is shepherding the people that are doing the task. And if God ever calls you in any area to lead, to be a shepherd, or if he just calls you as a Christian to be a shepherd of the sheep of your own family, your own children, or those coworkers and neighbors and family, those people that live on your block who you're trying to spiritually shepherd for Christ. If you're going to be a shepherd for Christ, you need to be a shepherd like Christ. And you need to do it the way he did it. And what's that mean? Well, he laid down his life for the sheep. And so it's going to begin with self-sacrificing service. And please hear me. I don't want there to be any doubt about this. Shepherding others at whatever level it's at, whether it's being a parent or it's being an elder in the church, or being on the staff of the church, it is never, ever about you feeling good about yourself. That's not why we do it. No spiritual ministry is about you getting to fully express yourself or to have your voice heard. And whenever I hear staff say that, I know that they probably should not be in this as a vocation, because that's not why we do this. Listen, shepherding is never going to be about your convenience or your preferences. In fact, I can guarantee you it's almost always inconvenient. But the moment we sign on to be a shepherd for God, from that point on, every decision now is about the flock that God has given us oversight for. And be assured, not every sheep is going to recognize that you're trying to do this for them. Much less are they all going to express gratitude for your sacrifices. But we don't do it for that reason. We don't do it for the praise of men. We are to do what is best for the flock, even when the sheep don't like it. You're to do what's best for your kids, even when your kids don't like it. Because we are called to serve the Father, and he is the Lord of all. He is the owner of the sheep. Secondly, to serve the shepherd, we have to truly love the sheep. That means we got to seek to know them and to allow ourselves to be known by them. And this means getting into your calendar and changing it. Because you've got to make relationships and service and ministry the new priorities of your calendar. It's not about you anymore. It's about the flock of God. And if you won't do that, don't pretend like you're some kind of spiritual person. This is what shepherds do. It means you're going to have to begin to live your life with relationships as a priority, and you're going to have to live with a vulnerability and a transparency that frankly makes all of us a little uncomfortable. But good shepherds love the sheep, and you got to know the sheep to love the sheep. Lynn Anderson is one of my favorite authors, and years ago he wrote this awesome book, the best book I've ever seen on how to be a good elder in a local church. And for years I've been giving it to elders and asking elders to read it. And it's great. His title on this book on how to be a good elder, the title of the book is They Smell Like Sheep. And that's because great shepherds, they smell like sheep because they love the sheep and they live their lives so close to them. Thirdly, to serve the chief shepherd, we too have to continually be seeking to unite the sheep. This is our mission. This has a couple of ways. This is the small way. It's not the primary way. John 17, we hear the Lord's high priestly prayer. Remember what Jesus prayed for the night before he went to the cross? He's pouring out his heart to the Father. You know what he prayed for? He prayed for the unity of the church. He prayed, Father, may they be one as you and I are one. He kind of said that up earlier, didn't he? Friends, I think since that was what was on the heart of Jesus before he went to the cross, I suspect that none of us fully understand the great sin of murmuring and complaining and criticizing and gossiping and creating division in the church. I think none of us understand how that breaks the heart of God and kindles his wrath against us. But I have to say this, uniting the sheep in this text is not mostly about peace and unity in the church, but rather it's about helping the good shepherd call and gather all of his sheep out of all the world's folds where they're slumbering. He's trying to form this one flock, and he has sheep out there that we got to find them and we got to bring them in. And if we're going to do that, we got to be like the good shepherd who, remember, what did he do? He left the 99 to go find the one. And that's the spirit that shepherds have to have. And I'm just going to make this really practical. This is what this means for you. Who are you going to invite to come with you to Easter services on April 21st? If you're going to be a shepherd for God, you got to find someone to bring them, because that's a week that people will say yes. Who are you going to tell about this new Thursday night service, this weekend alternative for people that may never have or never will go to church on a Sunday, but they might try a dinner on Thursday night and check that out. Who are you going to tell about that? And in your life, for whose salvation are you right now diligently praying? Who are you sharing your testimony, your story? Who are you sharing the good news with, that Jesus is the good shepherd? And right now, Jesus in this time is calling all of his flock out of the folds of the world. He's calling together anyone who will hear his voice and by faith follow him. You can come and be part of it. Who are you sharing that with? But the primary purpose of the Lord's words here is not to help us be better shepherds, but it's to help you and I really understand what it means that he is our good shepherd. Just think about the implications of that. Jesus Christ, the Lord of lords, the King of kings, he is our good shepherd. Friends, he so wanted you and he so wanted me to be members of his flock that he laid down his life on a cruel cross to atone for the penalty of our sin. And you know what? Still today, he will not abandon us when the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. He will stand between us and spiritual destruction. And I want you to think about this. Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, he wants to know you and to be known by you. He wants an intimate, personal love relationship with you. And listen, no matter where you have been slumbering, from every background, every ethnicity, every nation, tribe, and tongue, he is calling us to be members of his one flock. He is our Good Shepherd. Friends, you can trust him. So I challenge you to hear his voice. Go to him. You leave wherever you are and you go to him. And then you follow him wherever he leads. As at our campuses right now, we're going to do a transition. The screen's going to come down, but I'm going to be on the small screen, so listen. Stay tuned in. I want to close with some very, very familiar words, but I want you to hear them with fresh ears. And as I read this text, I want you to personalize this. If you believe that Jesus is your shepherd, you personalize this. And we do it by emphasizing I and me and my. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And all God's people said,